If you're the type of gamer who just wants a machine that works out of the box, runs your favorite titles at solid 60 frames per second without you having to tweak a dozen settings, and doesn't empty your wallet for a bunch of features you'll never use, then stay with me for the next few minutes. The iBUYPOWER Element Gaming PC promises that kind of hassle-free experience, and I'll tell you whether it actually delivers. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. The biggest hesitation most people have when they stare at a pre-built gaming rig is the fear of overpaying for flashinthappan hardware that will be obsolete before they've even gotten past the first expansion pack. You've probably imagined unboxing a tower, plugging in the power cord, and then sitting there watching the fans while the system spins up, only to discover you need to upgrade the GPU a month later because the graphics card can't keep up. That feeling of buyer's remorse is real, especially when you're juggling a budget and a desire for reliable day-to-day performance. So, let's break this down the way a real buyer would. The Element comes with an Intel Core i7-14700F, an RTX 5070 12GB GPU, 32GB of DDR5 RAM clocked at 5200 MHz, and a 1TB NVMe SSD. On paper those specs look like a future-proof monster, but the question is, how does that translate to the games you actually play, the work you might do on the side, and the price you pay for it? First, who should consider this PC? If you're into titles that lean heavily on rasterization, think Call of Duty, Modern Warfare, Fortnite on high settings, or Elden Ring at 1080p 1440p, and you also like to stream or record your sessions without sacrificing frame rate, the combination of a 12-core i7 and a 12GB RTX 5070 is a solid match. The 32GB of DDR5 means you won't be swapping memory when you have a browser with dozens of tabs open while gaming, and the 1TB SSD provides enough room for a handful of AAA games plus a sizable library of indie titles. If you also need a decent workhorse for things like video editing or 3D modeling on the side, the CPU's extra cores give you that headroom without needing a separate workstation. On the other side of the equation, skip this rig if you're a competitive esports player who demands the absolute highest refresh rates on a 1440p or 4K monitor, or if you've already invested in a high refresh rate display and plan to upgrade to a top-tier RTX 4090 soon. The RTX 5070 sits nicely in the mid-range tier, but its raw rasterization bandwidth isn't quite enough to consistently push 4K ultra-high settings at 144 frames per second. You'll still get great visuals, but you'll be trading a few frames for richer textures. Also, if you're a strict DIY enthusiast who wants to handpick every component, the Element's pre-built nature means you won't have as much control over the cooling loop or the exact brand of RAM used. Now, let's talk practical strengths. The biggest win for most reviewers is the out-of-the-box performance. Plug the Element in, fire up Cyberpunk 2077 on high settings, and you'll see a stable 6070 frames per second at 1080p without having to drop any major features. The RTX 5070's ray tracing cores handle the lighting effects without choking the frame rate, which is a step up from older 30 series cards that often needed DLSS to stay smooth. The 32GB of DDR5 also means you practically never see a bottleneck when you open Photoshop, load a large Unity project, or switch between multiple games in a single session. Another practical plus is the included gamer keyboard and mouse. They aren't budget peripherals. You get a full-size mechanical keyboard with RGB picky lighting and a programmable mouse that supports up to 8000 dpi. For a newcomer who doesn't already have a set of peripherals, this bundle saves you the cost and the headache of hunting down compatible gear. It also means the system looks cohesive right out of the box, which many first-time buyers appreciate when they set up a dedicated gaming space. What are the hidden trade-offs? The first thing you'll notice is the case's airflow design. iBUYPOWER opted for a slimmer chassis to keep the footprint low, but that also limits the size of the intake fans. In a hot summer room, the system can run a bit louder once the GPU hits 80°C under load. It's not a deal-breaker, but you'll hear a subtle increase in fan RPM after a marathon gaming session. If you plan to overclock the CPU or push the GPU beyond its stock clocks, you might want to consider adding an aftermarket exhaust fan down the line. Another aspect to consider is upgrade path. The RTX 5070 is a decent mid-range card now, but the PCIe slot is only a singlex 16-lane, which technically caps the bandwidth compared to newer motherboards that support PCIe 5.0. That means if you eventually swap in a next-gen GPU, you'll get a little less headroom than a custom-built rig with a newer motherboard. The SSD is a standard 1 TB NVMe, but the motherboard only supports up to a 2 TB.